All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Diane Bossenjack, and I am the Membership Manager for the American Institute of Biological Sciences. I am your IT support for this call, for this webinar. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded for archival purposes. If you have any questions or any issues, please feel free to use the chat option in Zoom. At the end, time permitting, we will be offering a Q&A session. All you'll have to do, again, on the bottom of the Zoom platform, you will see a Q&A box. If you click on that, you can type in your questions and I will relay them to Rob. So let's go ahead and get started. Today, Dr. Rob Gropp is going to be discussing the NIBA status report for the BCoN. Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Diane. So thank you all for joining us for this webinar program. And this is the first actually of a series of webinars that BCoN is going to be holding this year. So this is sort of the inaugural test run for this. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is a report that we released last year. Before we get into that, however, a little bit of acronym decoding for everyone. I think I've captured most of the organization names and acronyms that I might inadvertently use during today's talk here on this slide. So hopefully this will help everyone sort of keep things straight. And I will endeavor to not slip into too many acronyms. However, I can't promise that I won't inadvertently start using some. So again, hopefully you're somewhat familiar with a number of these. They've been in circulation for quite a while. But again, these are some of the organizations or terms that reports that we'll reference here today. So with that, again, today's program is an output of the Biodiversity Collections Network, which is an NSF-funded research coordination network grant to the American Institute of Biological Sciences. And it's a standard RCN, already using an acronym there for everybody. Didn't put that on the last slide, so I thought I'd throw it in. It's a standard research coordination network grant, 5-year period of time, with the objective of trying to work on adding to, building out, engaging additional members of the biodiversity collections and the digitization community to sort of help build a stronger, more sustainable community of practice that's able to digitally capture and use and make available biodiversity specimen images and associated data both now and into the future. The organization, the grant, we're on the back half of the grant at this point. But when it came together, it was initially sort of the partner organizations that pulled it together initially were AIBS, the Natural Science Collections Alliance, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, and IDIG Bio. So a number of the organizations that represent either the research community or the biodiversity community or some of the practitioners and professionals within the biodiversity natural history collections communities came together. And I'm happy to say that since then, the number of organizations that generally have endorsed or supported BCoN and through extension, the Network Integrated Biocollections Alliance, which is the organizing report that set the trajectory for the work that I'm going to talk about today, we're now up to 38 organizations who have endorsed this sort of digitization and community building initiative. So it's a good cross-cut and representative array of organizations. And if your organization is not listed on the BCoN website as a supporting organization, I encourage you to reach out to me and add your organization's name to the list. There's no cost to it. It's just simply an expression of your engagement and support in the broader community, your willingness to help us collectively move the needle, so to speak. So before we get much further into the heart of things, the BCoN Advisory Council is really the group of individuals who collectively share the workload And so I wanted to make sure to list everyone, as well as acknowledge and commend them for their contributions and support to this project. So you'll see we have, again, a representative group of folks from small and large institutions from different parts of the community, and different perspectives. So this is the group of individuals who carry the water for the effort. Now, BCoN, again, as I mentioned, we've been around for a couple of years now, and so I wanted to sort of include some of the work that we've already done, as well as foreshadow some of the reports that are going to be coming out and the meetings that are going to be organized and convened this year. So this is a partial list of some of what we've done. The first couple of items there, the collections communications item, as well as ISOBank, are two workshops that we convened in 2015 and 16. Those reports have been published and are available both on the BCoN website as well as other places. The ISOBank report was actually published up last year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So those are a couple items that are already out and about. Today we're talking about the NIBA assessment, which is a workshop that was organized last year as sort of an effort to benchmark progress toward the goals that are outlined in that. And then you'll see there's a number of different meetings, some of which have just recently taken place within the last few months. And the reports are still being developed. For example, we had a meeting in Cambridge. Actually, we've had two meetings in Cambridge in the last 6 months, one around sort of next generation and future research opportunities, another one around legal issues associated with collections. Both of those will be written up and be a topic of a forthcoming webinar in the coming weeks and months, so stay tuned for those. We also just recently, in February, convened a data accessibility and interoperability working group out at the University of Kansas, and that report is also in the process of being prepared. So a number of things that are going to be showing up in the next few weeks that we're going to be asking you, the community, to comment on, to review, to share input. We're also in the process now, and again, we'll be hosting a webinar that will discuss some of these issues and solicit community input. We're working to organize a small meeting for this fall that will convene a focus group to really sort of set out some potential opportunities. So as we're sort of working through this process of mobilizing data, the question becomes, what are the exciting next steps, and how can it all be capitalized on and used? So there will be a meeting later this year that will hopefully outline some potential opportunities there that we'll hope the community will help us refine and clarify as we move forward. I haven't listed all of the education programs that we've participated in or sponsored, because there have been a number, really going back to 2015, and we have a few more planned this year. I'm happy to say that we've supported the participation of community members in workshops on everything from bioinformatics workforce training and education needs to the opportunities to use Biocollections data in quantitative and undergraduate education opportunities and those sorts of things. Some of those meetings actually ultimately have given rise to a number of other sort of community building initiatives that have just recently been funded to, again, further develop educational opportunities around biodiversity, quantitative analysis, things like that for undergraduates. One of those initiatives is called BLUE. I believe that's biological literacy for undergraduate education. That initiative is just now kind of building out and launching. So there'll be a number of additional opportunities to sort of leverage and engage both the student as well as the professional educator communities as we go forward. So again, these are some of what we've been up to. More information or as information from these programs develops, we do always post it on the website as well as share it as widely as we can. So please keep an eye out for these resources. Again, as I just mentioned, we're organizing a series of webinars this year to share information about these workshops as well as to gain input. from the community. So those are all listed on the BCoN website, and we'll be adding more as the year goes on. So I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, as well as follow us on Twitter, things like that, where we'll announce those, but also come back and register on the website, visit the events section of the BCoN website on a regular basis to keep up to date on what programs we have taking place. And so for your convenience, the website is listed right here. It's just bcon.aibs.org. So I encourage you to review the content on that. And if you have also relevant meetings that you'd like to share, let us know, and we'll be happy to include those on the website. So I've foreshadowed a little bit, used the term a few times now, digitization and biodiversity collections. And that's really what we're going to talk about for the balance of today. And that's kind of the core and the central elements of the BCoN RCN effort, as well as the Network Integrated Biocollections Alliance. So NIBA is an outgrowth. It's a community organized and articulated strategic plan that developed about a decade ago with various stakeholders coming together to talk about what would really help to mobilize research around biodiversity, what the technological advancements and developments that we were encountering could enable. And what it resulted in, again, is a strategic plan that set sort of a long-term goal, a 10-year trajectory, and made an ambitious call, really, to organize the community around efforts to digitize both federal and non-federal biodiversity collections and the associated data, such that it would become available and usable in other research fields to advance biodiversity research, to improve management and curation of collections, as well as to stimulate and enhance education. So that was, again, led to a 10-year commitment from the federal government, the National Science Foundation specifically, for the non-federal piece of the biodiversity collections community. And I'm happy to say that the National Science Foundation has in fact committed $100 million to support digitization of biodiversity collections. And that's been for a 10-year commitment that's about to expire in 2020. So we're kind of at a point now where it's going to be important to figure out what might come next. And in fact, how well has the community done in terms of addressing these issues? So last year in January 2017, the BCoN program convened an experts roundtable here in Washington, D.C. for a 2-day workshop to really review the community's collective progress toward the goals outlined in the NIBA plan, and to sort of see which ones have been accomplished, which ones still have work to do, which ones are sort of more or less relevant than they were, what's changed in the landscape that might require some reconsideration or reshifting, and with really sort of an opportunity to look to the future and say, well, based on the progress we've made, what do we think needs to happen next? And so that workshop began by sort of going back and looking at the initial NIBA strategic plan, which again was generated by the community about a decade ago. And here you'll see the 3 big overarching goals that plan articulated. In general, it set as goals the objective of digitizing collections across the United States, as you'll see here. And so very ambitious, very broad, very big. Importantly, then, a couple of years later, and through a grant to the American Institute of Biological Sciences, it was realized that there was a need to sort of take those 3 goals and then really explore how do we implement them? What steps, what actions need to happen if the community is to achieve these 3 big, ambitious goals. And so through a workshop organized by AIBS, there was a good cross-section of about 40 folks that came together to consider those 3 goals, and they identified 6 what we'd call implementation strategies or implementation goals, which is what you see on the slide here before you now. And so those range from establishing an organizational and governance structure to advancing engineering, enhancing the training of existing staff and recruitment of next generation professionals, increasing participation in and support of NIBA goals from additional stakeholders, so sort of broadening the community that is supportive and engaged in digitization activities and efforts, to the fifth goal being establish an enduring and sustainable knowledge base. So we're getting a community, a culture, a system of practice and resource base that's all aligned in such a way that the community can sustain what gets digitized and prevent future backlogs. To sort of continue to keep up with digitizing specimens, images, and associated data. And then finally, the sixth goal was to infuse specimen-based learning and exploration into formal and informal education. And again, these are all the 6 implementation goals. In the actual plan, you'll see that these are fleshed out a little bit more thoroughly than what I've summarized here. So I would direct you to the original document for much more detail, but these are the high-level sort of directions that those goals hit on. And so we took, during the workshop in January of 2017, again, we had about 30 experts and community stakeholders from across the community. So they were everything from federal and non-federal institutions, private and public. We had collection managers and curators, researchers, graduate students, early career professionals, sort of you name it, educators, informal and formal, professional society representatives, and federal agency representatives. So we convened everybody to sort of bring their expertise to bear on a collective sort of assessment of those 6 goals, to sort of see how well are we being the community doing and moving the needle forward on these 6 items. And so we kind of broke people out into groups that tackled and reviewed each of these goals. And that's what I'm going to try to do now, is sort of summarize what some of the key recommendations each of those work groups generated, with a few of the recommendations that arose. And then again, there's much greater detail in the original report on all of these, so you can get a much richer flavor of the conversation around some of these goals by reviewing that document, which is available on our website. So again, governance was sort of one of the big overarching goals, which was initially recognized as a need. And so we kind of looked at that in January and realized that although there hasn't been a formal entity established to sort of drive governance and organizational structure, there has been a significant increase in the amount of community coordination and collaboration. And again, for example, BCoN being one of the examples of that, where you had 4 community serving organizations come together and collaborate and sustain a collaboration over a number of years to really share responsibility and decision-making and authority and to leverage resources and expertise toward this common goal of sort of digitizing biodiversity collections. It's also the case that since the strategic plan was developed, we've also had the establishment of iDigBio, which is an NSF-funded center that's helped to coordinate a lot of what's going on within the NSF-funded or the non-federal digitization community. So there have been efforts to sort of pull together entities to help shepherd community actions forward, just not a formal sort of central one-size-fits-all kind of organizational structure to date. Now, the participants in the January workshop did come up with a scenario or a plan that they proposed for sort of going forward that could both continue to advance the implementation of NIBA, but also could be used as sort of an organizing structure for future digitization efforts, whatever those might be, sort of post this initial 10-year period. And again, the actual architecture that was proposed or suggested, which again, everyone in the meeting recognized was one model, not necessarily the only model, but nonetheless a model that could hopefully stimulate thought and deliberation, was proposed. And during that workshop, it was really viewed as sort of a structure where it might be that sort of the responsibilities kind of fell into about 4 different categories. So maybe it would be appropriate to create sort of 4 centers or institutes or entities that would have responsibility over certain functions, and there'd be sort of an overarching coordinating entity that kind of worked to facilitate collaboration and coordination among those. So that was the general idea that was proposed during that. And so we're always interested in whether people think that would be useful, or whether the current model is working well, or if there's an alternative model that should be considered. So we're always interested in what people might have to suggest. Again, this is a rather ambitious goal. The second goal was around very technical, probably the most technical of the various implementation strategies, and it centered around advancing the engineering aspects of digitization. And so what you'll see here, there were actually 6 sort of recommendations that the assembled group felt still required attention or additional attention going forward. And so you'll see those listed here on this slide. Chief among those was the recognition that there's still a considerable amount of digitization that needs to be done, particularly for groups such as the insects. And there's just a huge backlog, and they're a complex group to capture. And so there's just still a need for, at some level, sustained manpower and resources to catch up or to get caught up on those. And it shouldn't be forgotten that we still have those kind of objectives to achieve. But then you also see there's a number of other activities here that are viewed as important. And you'll start to notice, I think on this slide, and it'll resurface on future slides, words like coordinate and collaborate and share, which became very common points throughout this workshop and are increasingly so. So you'll note that as we go forward. The workshop that we're discussing here today also then sort of focused in on sort of 4 points that are viewed as important next steps that really need to be addressed or still require attention. And you'll see those listed on this slide. So number 1, develop an annotation system to improve data quality. Continue to develop new tools through aggregators for investigators, comparative collection statistics, and develop models for facilitating digitization, aggregation, and linking of data from multidisciplinary collecting initiatives. And the multidisciplinary collecting will come back again shortly. And then finally, the 4th action for sort of somewhat immediate attention is continue to investigate models for community long-term database file archiving. And so a number of these things are in fact underway, but there's considerable community interest in seeing these 4 activities particularly move forward a little bit more significantly. So for goal 3, there was really, the view of the group was that the current implementation strategy was fine as stated. There was no real need to fundamentally reconsider it or alter how it was articulated. But there were, as you'll see here, 7 actions for future work or needs that still need to be addressed. And again, some of these have been surfaced a little bit, and you'll see, there have been some efforts, for example, through Spinach, through their emerging professionals group and through some of their other programming at their conferences, that are tackling some of these issues. But there is, in fact, still considerable need for additional effort to sort of share resources or to consider whether or not the community can take some steps to increase professional training opportunities and certification needs to help current and future practitioners ensure they have the right skills and resources, but also to help institutions properly plan for the kinds of professionals they need, and to understand how they can best help support them. So you see here a number of activities that relate to everything from sharing information that already exists about different kinds of job descriptions, for example, so that there's some level of consistency, or they start to include key and appropriate points and proper terms, to the more robust sorts of activities, such as developing new training programs. So there's still a need for more work in this arena. With respect to stakeholder engagement, which was the implementation goal 4, which really centered around, how does the community endeavor to engage other members of the scientific community that are maybe not directly biodiversity or natural history collections personnel or professionals, but sort of related scientists, or even parts of the community that are not centrally involved in digitization, but also the broader community more generally, people beyond the immediate scientific community. But one of the interesting ideas that surfaced and had a fair amount of discussion during the January meeting was really the recognition of sort of taking a somewhat different approach toward how collecting is done, recognizing that there's still a need for increased collecting, that collecting has dropped off for at least some classes of organisms, but also that to really answer some of the most pressing questions that would engage additional stakeholders, decision makers, policymakers, whether it's folks dealing with public health issues or environmental sustainability or food issues or what have you. There's really a need to sort of expand and increase the number of people that are involved in what was described as sort of holistic sampling and collecting endeavors. So getting more data from each specimen or each collecting event, and making sure that we all know where it goes and how it can be tied back together and shared and utilized for additional research questions and exercises. Again, with the idea being that this will help to answer incredibly timely national as well as global questions and concerns. So it was sort of the way that the assembled individuals thought about reshaping the 4th implementation goal. 5th, sustainability. This was, of course, a challenge for all current research endeavors, regardless of what they are. It's how do you maintain the capacity that's built from a grant or from an initiative, as well as how do you identify and pull in resources, particularly financial, most often financial, to help keep the train on the tracks once the initial resources has expired. And so there was a fair amount of discussion given to that, and you'll see here 3 points that the group thought were important to sort of reframe or to add a little bit of additional specificity to the initial implementation goal around sustainability. And so everyone can obviously see these, but they you sort of put a little bit more fine tooth to that comb. So sustainability remains a big challenge for the community as a whole, and it was addressed during the January meeting. Now, education is the 6th implementation strategy, and there was a considerable amount of attention given to it at the January workshop, but also, as I mentioned earlier, throughout the course of the BCoN grant initiative. We've participated in a number of meetings and supported others participating, and we will be organizing a couple more yet before the end of the grant. So for this particular program, though, what we sort of saw was additional sort of fine-tuning of the education implementation strategy a little bit. And it, for today's purposes, the way I sort of chose to focus on it is to create sort of 2 clusters. One is the more formal or traditional education strategy, so everything primarily around the undergraduate educational experience, both from a student perspective as well as from the faculty perspective. So there were a number of general recommendations that were offered up. Not all of them are in fact listed on this slide. There were quite a few, and there's a rich narrative that goes with them. So I would direct you back to the initial workshop report to get a much more comprehensive flavor of the important issues raised here. But you'll see that a number of them sort of came back and centered around data literacy and the use or the potential use of biodiversity collections data, particularly for undergraduates, in terms of helping them develop data skills, data analysis skills. It's potentially a very rich source of data that can be used in a number of ways. It's a great opportunity to engage undergraduates in legitimate research endeavors as part of their undergraduate experience. So that pulls in opportunities to partner with research experience for undergraduates, but also to just find more creative and innovative ways to engage research activities into the regular curriculum. But there's also a recognition that there's a need to share best practices and curriculum and models with faculty members, and to try to help ensure that people aren't having to reinvent wheels, but can access and share and leverage resources that have been developed. So that's one sort of, or two kind of areas in which there was some real discussion given. It was also noted that oftentimes, the education pieces are sort of afterthoughts to some of the research programs and processes. And so it was a general encouragement that, as with other parts of often evaluation, for example, to really try to pull up and include educators in various digitization initiatives from the get-go. And so have them involved from the start as a way to ensure that education is infused throughout, and that the kinds and the ways that data are being provided are useful for students, things like that. The other broad sort of area for education that was discussed, I kind of clustered under the citizen science umbrella for purposes today. And that was really around, what can be done to sort of improve informal education, informal engagement, and to enlist citizen scientists in the endeavor to gather data that could be used to help increase digitization efforts, or to simply improve the amount of data available or the number of individuals using the data for different purposes. So maybe that's for formal research purposes, or maybe it's for some other creative endeavor. Maybe it could be used in some kind of artistic fashion, or for some other scholarly or activity. But again, there's the realization that there is within the public an interest in biodiversity and an interest in nature, and there's benefits to engaging individuals in that effort. So one of the efforts that was discussed, of course, was We Dig Bio, which is a citizen science initiative that was sort of has a global perspective on it, and has grown out of the I Dig Bio initiative down at the University of Florida and Florida State, as a way to engage individuals in the biodiversity, digitization, and research process. And so what else can be done? How else can we engage individuals in different activities to help address the backlog, to engage them in efforts that will help to mobilize data that's already available, or that could be available in existing collections? And then obviously, what are the benefits to those individuals from their participation? So to some degree, it could be job skills, additional technical skills, different things like that. So there's a lot of rich opportunity in this sort of informal or citizen engagement arena around some of these digitization initiatives. And so there was, again, a recommendation that these efforts continue to be expanded and explored. So overall, I think that the take home from last year's workshop was that there is, in fact, some good progress that has been made already toward these goals. They're obviously not all accomplished. There's considerable work yet to do, but there has been significant progress made, particularly in a few areas. So we've, as a result of some of the work that BCoN's done, there's now communications training programs that have been developed and are available to biodiversity and collections professionals. There's also through IDIG Bio and working through that effort and through the various thematic collection networks that have been funded from the National Science Foundation, there's been a significant amount of effort to develop new tools to improve digitization and data management and curation quality. But there's also been some development of workflows and standardization of practices and processes that have been made available to a large number of institutions, many of which, in fact, would fall into the category of small or regional kinds of collections that might not have large resource bases. So it's really made it possible for a lot of those institutions to join into and participate in this national initiative to capture and mobilize this data. So those are very important and significant steps forward that have arisen as a result of the framework document that NIBA outlined. But again, as I mentioned, there's still additional work to be done, and some of that, again, is going to surface and report recommendations that are coming out from BCoN this year. For example, our report from our February workshop on data interoperability and accessibility will include a number of different recommendations for where different parts of the data pipeline can improve communication and share responsibility to increase data usability and quality and things like that. Additionally, we're going to have an important workshop report from the Legal Issues program that is going to really be talking about, given that we now have biodiversity collections data becoming available, visible, discoverable through online portals and databases, what does that mean in a legal framework relative to things like the Nagoya Protocol? How do collections maintain compliance or become compliant with that and other regulatory frameworks? So we'll have a recommendation or a model coming out that sort of explores the Nagoya Protocol as a case study to sort of see what collections might need to consider or how they might need to consider things going forward. And so that, again, I think is another example of something that wasn't really spelled out in the initial NIBA report, but that has surfaced as an important aspect of both stakeholder engagement, but also, how do you manage workflows and how do you manage these different parts of the digitization pipeline and process for everyone's benefit. So again, I think on the whole, there's been good progress made, and we've seen, and I encourage everyone to visit the IDIG Bio website for a lot of really rich data from the federal, from the non-federal side of things. They have great metrics about how many specimens have been digitized, how many access to different collections and different things like that. So it's really become a really great entry point to identify things, to get into the biodiversity specimen and data collections pipeline. So again, I would absolutely recommend people take a look at the IDIG Bio portal as a way to get a much more comprehensive understanding of the really remarkable progress that has been made over the last just over half a dozen years with respect to biodiversity digitization. And again, as I've mentioned a couple times now, we'll be holding a few more workshops this year. We will both be sharing the findings of those programs, but also coming back to the community on several different occasions to ask for your input ahead of time to try to get information that will help us sort of think about how to structure those meetings, the kinds of topics that might need to be included, and then to help us evaluate and benchmark some of the recommendations that arise from those meetings. So again, I look forward to hearing any kind of questions or feedback. We'll take that back to the broader advisory council or to other appropriate workshops that we're going to organize. I encourage everyone to stay up to date with what we're doing by visiting the website, which is available at bcon.aibs.org, or to follow us on Twitter. And you see right there in the middle of the slide our Twitter handle, which is @BioCall_Network. So with that, I will stop talking, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Again, this program has been recorded, so we will make it available for anyone who's unable to join us today, as we will with future programs. As Diane mentioned, if you do have any questions, I would encourage you to use the Q&A chat function to pose them, and we will attempt to answer them at this time.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so on the bottom of the Zoom platform, you will see the Q&A. If you click on that, a little box will open up and you can type in your question. We'll give it a minute or two in case you guys want to type anything up. And again, if you do have any questions after the webinar, feel free to go to the website, and there's a place to submit, to contact us. So you can submit them that way as well.
All right. Well, seeing none, I will suggest that we.
Oh, I see one coming in.
I knew that would trigger it.
Do you want me to read it to you, Rob, or do you see it in the chat box? Okay, so it's from Jean Woods. What were the group's thoughts on the current multiple portals for downloading data? Seems like duplication of effort. However, in a recent class with undergrads, I found that they are all I found that they all had very different data sets, different fields in the downloads, etc. Very confusing. And she referenced the Vernet, iDigBio, and GIBF.
So I don't know that actually came up. I'm trying to go back in my brain to recall. I don't recall that coming up. I do know that the education group has raised those kind of questions in other places around how can we make this a little bit more efficient or consistent. So I don't think I have an answer for you right now, but I will definitely share that with folks like Anna Monfils, who's our point person on that, and see what we can kind of figure out or recommend.
All right, great. I think that's so far. All right.
Good. Well, thank you all. And again, if you do have additional questions or suggestions, feel free to send them this way, and I'll be happy to share them with the appropriate groups or individuals, and at least make sure that the issues are staying on the table.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for taking your time, and thank you, Rob, for your great presentation. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week.